Spengler. As the year ends, perhaps the philosopher of decline, Oswald Spengler, is worth looking at. A Nietzschean philosopher, with whatever differences he has with Nietzsche's philosophy, we say that The Decline of the West, Spengler's masterwork, is a must-read for all Nietzscheans. It has insights and it has a richness that pays dividends to whoever reads it. It widens the culture and the consciousness. And it's not surprising, therefore, that this work had a huge impact when it was published. Unlike Nietzsche, whose books were ignored when they were published, Spengler's were not. Spengler became a huge hit. His works were widely read, widely discussed, and widely purchased. He experienced a fame that few intellectuals experience in their lifetime. And so it's doubly ironic, is it not, that he has, in Bowden's terms, gone down the memory hole. Bowden, who wrote an introduction to this small work of Spengler's, Men and Technics, said, as we recall in our speech on Bowden, that Nietzsche was saved from the memory hole by the rehabilitation and revisionism of Kaufmann. As unethical as that was, it allowed Nietzsche to stay within the echelon of philosophy that he deserved to be in. But no such rehabilitation or revisionism of Spengler was made. And so Spengler's work did disappear after the war and only went to the fringes, as we see. But of course, you can't keep a good man down. And we see that eventually Spengler's ideas are working their way back up. And those who have been influenced by Spengler but have not paid the debt are paying that debt now. And Spengler's work, like Nietzsche's work, is as relevant today as it ever was. Spengler began his life in 1880 and grew up, therefore, just at the point where Nietzsche's work was starting to emerge into the mainstream of philosophy and culture. Not surprising, therefore, that the young Spengler became a Nietzschean and was influenced by Nietzsche and Goethe. Influenced by Goethe's approach to science as well. And it must be said that Spengler was very much a polymath. He was a mathematician as much as he was a poet. He was extremely wide-ranging in his interests and in his absorption, much wider than, say, Nietzsche. And Spengler's argument was that philosophers, including Nietzsche, prior to him, had only really worked from the narrow perspective of their own European standing. They worked on the basis of the ancient, medieval, modern program. Whereas Spengler wanted the world historical program, touched upon by Hegel, but no one had really done it convincingly, according to Spengler. And Spengler set about to do that with his mammoth Decline of the West. He looked at all the cultures across the world. And just as Nietzsche said, he looked at all the moralities across the world and found, too, the slave and master to be predominant. So Spengler looked at all the cultures across the world that he could find, and what he found was that all cultures behave like living organisms. They are born, they live, they mature, they go into old age, and then they die. They do this at different rates according to their uniqueness. All cultures are unique, and they have different lifespans, but the main distinction in all cultures is that of culture and civilization. Culture is the vital, living part of that people's culture, and the civilization is the old age, the decay, and the end of that culture. And it was this idea, the morphology of cultures, that made the book The Decline of the West the important piece of work that it was. And these ideas are mainly indicated in Nietzsche's work and in the work of Goethe. But Spengler develops them. And that's an understatement to say that he develops them. He really propels them and takes them fully to task. So Spengler does not fight in the First World War because of his severe heart problem. And this is an important thing to bear in mind with Spengler's life. And it's also worth mentioning that Spengler's great maternal grandmother was Jewish. Her surname was Moses. So as regards the Third Reich, Spengler was not considered fully Aryan and part Jewish. Spengler joined the Nietzsche archive and worked with Nietzsche's sister from about 1920 onwards for 15 years. He worked on the board of directors of Nietzsche archive and worked on some of the manuscripts. And he published many other works during this period. He was very much a nationalist, and despite his own Jewish ancestry, a racialist, and he didn't regard the Jews as having a rightful place in Europe, seeing them as an alien culture. They were part of the Nietzschean culture, the culture which Spengler says started with Zoroaster through the Jewish religion, through the Middle Eastern Christian religion, and into the Islamic religion, a culture that is dying and dead, a culture that has died. Cultures which die don't just disappear, they leave their forms like huge dead trees on the landscape. Bugs infest them, they carry on. They are dead, but they live on as formless, dead things, like the carcass of a great whale on the beach. And so he saw the Western culture, which he called the Faustian culture, the Western culture, he called it the Faustian because for him it didn't begin in ancient Greece and Rome, it began in medieval Europe. That's when the Western culture begins for him, and it reaches its apotheosis in the 18th century with the French monarchies, and then declines in the 19th century and becomes a civilization in the 19th century. He calls it the Faustian civilization. He opposes it to the Apollonian classical civilization. He does not take the Dionysian because that's rooted in the classical. He takes the Faustian. It's a different view to Nietzsche there. He takes the Faustian as the symbol of the Western culture. And for him, the Western culture is in steep decline. And he notes that when he does homologous and analogous cultures comparisons, that Napoleon is like unto Alexander the Great. Caesarism appears, and that's like Napoleon and Alexander, who are Caesar figures. Caesarism appears in civilization, i.e., when culture is dying and in its death throes. And therefore this became an uncomfortable outlook for the fascists of the 20s and the 30s. Mussolini and the Third Reich had both admired his work, but the implications of Caesarism started to bite hard, because Spengler was really saying that fascism was nothing more than Caesarism, which always occurs when cultures are about to crash and die and burn. Now, of course, fascism and indeed Nietzscheanism does not regard culture as being so destined in that pessimistic way. Nietzsche says that spirit is that life which cuts into life, and therefore, with force of strong will, new cultures can be created. Superman can live. Mussolini's new man can be created, and the the Reich of 1,000 years can be created. We can cut out. We are not doomed. We can cut out from the civilization and create a new culture. Of course, this was denied by Spengler, and this was the main sticking point with him and indeed the Nietzsche archive and the Third Reich. Goebbels asked Spengler to speak at meetings, but he refused. Spengler had a spat with Alfred Rosenberg, the main philosopher of the Third Reich. And Spengler resigned in 1935 from the Nietzsche archive. Spengler protested against the anti-Semitic policies of the Third Reich, even though anti-Semitic elements are well within Spengler's own works. But of course, we've seen that Spengler's own ancestry may be the reason for his ambivalence on this aspect. He said that the anti-Semitism of the Third Reich was self-defeating, and maybe he was talking about himself there. And so he also regarded the racial outlook of the Third Reich as too biological and not spiritual enough. But whatever disagreements there may be, we can see that Spengler was an unhappy man. And after resigning from the Nietzsche archive in 1935, he died in 1936, aged 55, before his 56th birthday. He died a broken man from a massive heart attack. So it's quite a tragic end for Spengler. And therefore, it's quite bitter that he was dropped down the memory hole. But I think we see a revival in his work continuing now, because much of what he said was right. Many of his predictions are coming true.